In the gentle wisdom of Carl Jung, there is a quiet reminder that life unfolds not by force, but by allowing the current of the psyche to move in its own rhythm. We should not pretend to understand the world only by the intellect, Jung once wrote. The judgment of the intellect is only part of the truth. In our fast-paced world, we often clutch tightly to control, striving to shape outcomes by sheer will. Yet Jung teaches us that the psyche, much like nature, has seasons of growth, dormancy, and renewal that cannot be rushed. To force a flower to bloom before its time is to risk its withering. So too with the human soul. When we let go of our compulsions to dictate every turn, we open ourselves to synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that arise when we are in tune with life's deeper currents. This does not mean passive resignation, but rather a mindful surrender, trusting that the unconscious knows when and how to surface its insights. By embracing this flow, we foster an inner patience that respects the mysteries of our becoming. To let things flow naturally, as Jung suggests, is to live in dialogue with the unknown, where discovery unfolds not by demand, but by attentive presence. In this space of openness, life can surprise us, healing emerges, and we meet ourselves not as we force ourselves to be, but as we truly are. Dear everyone, before we continue the program, if you enjoy this topic, please comment number 1. If you'd like me to create more similar content, comment number 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any useful videos. Thank you and wish you all meaningful moments. Have you ever felt exhausted, not just physically, but deep in your soul, from constantly trying to make life fit your expectations? Maybe you've spent months, even years, pushing and pulling at circumstances, hoping that with just enough effort, persistence, or control, things would finally fall into place. But instead of clarity, you encounter resistance. Instead of progress, you meet dead ends. Instead of peace, there's only a growing sense of frustration. It's as if the more tightly you grip the wheel, the more the road beneath you disappears. You're not alone in this. Many of us are conditioned to believe that force is the key to success. Force of will, force of intellect, force of ambition. Society praises the go-getters, the ones who refuse to take no for an answer, who make things happen. Yet beneath the surface of this relentless pursuit there lies an aching question. What if life isn't something to conquer, but something to understand, to dance with, to flow alongside? This is where the wisdom of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and pioneer of depth psychology, offers us an invitation to stop forcing and instead to let things flow naturally. Jung saw the human psyche not as a machine to be programmed, but as a living, breathing ecosystem with its own patterns, rhythms, and seasons. He understood that what we suppress or attempt to control in our unconscious will inevitably return, sometimes as suffering, sometimes as strange coincidences, sometimes as dreams, symbols, or even crises. Jung's philosophy teaches that life is not linear. The soul does not unfold according to timelines, plans, or productivity hacks. Instead, our deepest transformations arise when we learn to listen to what Jung called the self, the totality of our being, both conscious and unconscious. This self is like a wise current beneath the surface of our lives, guiding us not according to our ego's desires, but according to the needs of our soul's evolution. And so, in this video, we will journey through the heart of Jung's teachings on surrender, flow, and the deeper intelligence of the psyche. We'll explore why forcing often leads to inner conflict, how the unconscious communicates through symbols and synchronicities, and how we can cultivate a relationship with life that is less about domination and more about dialogue. If you've ever felt weary from trying to control everything, or if you've sensed that there's something wiser within you waiting to be heard, this exploration is for you. Together, let us step back from the illusion of control and step into the quiet, mysterious wisdom of the flow. As Jung himself reminds us, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally unsolvable. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Let us begin. 1. The hidden cost of forcing life. What Jung saw in our struggles. Why do we keep forcing things, even when deep down, we sense that it isn't working? Have you ever noticed how we often double down when life resists us? A relationship is falling apart, but we push harder. A career path feels wrong, but we persevere, convinced that persistence will bend reality to our will. It's as if we believe that with just enough pressure, the universe will comply. But what if the very act of forcing is part of the problem? Carl Jung observed this compulsion in his patients and in himself. He noticed that the ego, the part of us that wants control, struggles deeply with uncertainty. The ego craves predictability, clear answers, and a path forward that fits our existing ideas of success and happiness. But the unconscious, this vast, mysterious part of our psyche, is not interested in our plans. It operates on its own terms, often communicating through dreams, intuitions, and what Jung famously called synchronicity, or meaningful coincidences. When we force life, Jung would say, we create an internal split. On one side, the ego charges ahead, clinging to plans and expectations. On the other, the unconscious pushes back, not out of malice, but out of wisdom. This inner conflict can manifest as anxiety, depression, fatigue, or even physical symptoms. The more we resist the messages of the unconscious, the more force it takes to keep up the illusion of control, and the heavier the burden becomes. Jung wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." This isn't just a poetic statement. It reflects a psychological truth. By ignoring the undercurrents of our psyche, we amplify them. The more we avoid listening, the louder the signals get, often in ways we cannot ignore. Perhaps that job we've outgrown suddenly feels suffocating. That relationship we refuse to let go of begins to drain the life from us. That creative project we keep abandoning returns in our dreams, asking to be heard. At the heart of this struggle is a misunderstanding of power. Forcing is a form of power, yes, but it is a power rooted in fear. Fear that if we stop pushing, everything will fall apart. Fear that we will lose our place, our identity, our worth. But Jung saw another form of power, the power of alignment with the self, the deeper, wiser center of our psyche. This power does not come from domination or control. It arises when we stop resisting the messages of the unconscious and start listening. You might be wondering, but if I don't force things, won't I just stagnate? Jung's answer would be no, because life itself is movement. The psyche, like nature, is always evolving. The problem isn't that we're moving too slowly, it's that we're moving in the wrong direction. When we stop forcing, we allow the unconscious to guide us toward paths we might never have chosen, but which are truer to who we are becoming. In his own life, Jung experienced this during his famous confrontation with the unconscious, a period after his split with Freud, when he withdrew from professional life to explore his dreams, fantasies, and inner images. Rather than suppress these experiences, Jung let them flow, documenting them in what later became known as the Red Book. It was in this surrender that Jung discovered some of his most profound insights about the archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the transformative power of symbols. Jung teaches us that the unconscious is not our enemy. It is not chaos to be subdued, but a cosmos to be explored. When we treat it with respect, when we listen rather than suppress, we open a dialogue with the self. And in that dialogue, we often find that life begins to flow, not effortlessly, but organically. Paths open that we hadn't seen before. People, opportunities, and insights arise at just the right time, not because we forced them, but because we were aligned enough to recognize them. To let things flow naturally is not to abandon effort. It is to apply effort in harmony with our deeper nature. It is to trust that the self knows the way, even when our conscious mind does not. And this trust transforms our relationship with uncertainty. Instead of seeing it as a threat, we begin to see it as fertile ground for growth. Jung's perspective invites us to ask ourselves, where am I forcing life? Where am I ignoring the signs that something within me wants to change? These are not easy questions, but they are essential, because until we acknowledge where we are pushing against the current, we cannot begin to turn inward and listen for the quieter, wiser voice within. In the next section, we will delve deeper into the role of the unconscious and how its language of symbols, dreams, and synchronicities can guide us, if only we allow it. But for now, let us sit with this. Perhaps the exhaustion we feel is not a sign of weakness, but a signal that it is time to stop forcing and start listening. 2. The language of the unconscious, listening beyond words. If you've ever had a dream so vivid that it lingers with you for days, or experienced a coincidence so striking that it seemed orchestrated by fate itself, you've encountered the unconscious trying to speak to you. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to understanding these moments, not as random or trivial, but as essential messages from the depths of the psyche. He argued that the unconscious doesn't communicate the way the conscious mind does. It doesn't send memos or rational arguments. Instead, it speaks in symbols, metaphors, images, and patterns. Jung famously said, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Not only dark but also light, not only bestial, semi-human, and demonic, but superhuman, spiritual, and in the classical sense of the word, divine." This means that within us lies a vast hidden intelligence, a wisdom beyond the ego, speaking in a language we must learn if we want to truly stop forcing and begin flowing with life. Dreams, the royal road to the unconscious. For Jung, dreams were the most direct expressions of the unconscious. While Freud saw dreams largely as expressions of repressed desires, Jung viewed them as complex communications from the self, designed to restore balance to our psyche. When we ignore a part of ourselves in waking life, be it our creativity, emotions, or deeper yearnings, the unconscious compensates through dreams. It brings forth images, symbols, and narratives that, when interpreted carefully, reveal what we're missing. Imagine, for example, that you're constantly overworking, trying to force your way to success. Suddenly, you begin to dream of broken machinery or a river blocked by debris. The unconscious is painting a picture. Your inner life is obstructed. If you ignore this message, the blockage can grow, not just in your dreams, but in your waking experience, manifesting as burnout, dissatisfaction, or even illness. Jung believed that by paying attention to our dreams, we enter into an ongoing dialogue with the unconscious. It's as if we are learning a foreign language, one of symbols instead of syllables. But to truly listen, we must approach these messages not with the arrogance of the ego, but with the humility of a student willing to be taught. Synchronicity, when the outer world reflects the inner world. Another way the unconscious speaks is through synchronicity, Jung's term for meaningful coincidences that defy ordinary explanation. Have you ever thought of someone you haven't seen in years, only for them to call you the next day? Or maybe you were struggling with a personal decision and a stranger's comment or a song lyric suddenly seemed to provide an answer. These aren't just accidents. Jung posited that synchronicities occur when an inner psychological state aligns with an external event in a way that carries profound personal meaning. It's as if the boundary between inner and outer worlds blurs, revealing that the psyche is not isolated, but deeply connected to the fabric of reality. Synchronicities remind us that life itself has a rhythm, and when we attune to it, we find ourselves in the right place at the right time, not by force, but by resonance. They are gentle nudges from the universe saying, "Pay attention, there's something here for you." Symbols, the timeless language of the psyche. Both dreams and synchronicities are built upon symbols, which Jung described as the best possible expression for something we do not yet fully understand. A symbol is not a sign with a fixed meaning. It is dynamic, evolving as we evolve. The cross, the serpent, the tree, the river. These images recur across cultures and epochs, forming what Jung called archetypes, universal patterns residing in the collective unconscious. When you dream of climbing a mountain, that symbol might represent a personal challenge today. But as you grow, the same symbol could signify spiritual ascension or a quest for higher knowledge. Symbols are bridges between the known and the unknown, guiding us toward aspects of ourselves we have yet to integrate. By engaging with symbols, whether in dreams, art, myths, or everyday life, we begin to access the unconscious, not as an adversary to be controlled, but as a collaborator in our growth. The process of understanding symbols is not always immediate. It requires patience, reflection, and a willingness to sit with uncertainty, a stark contrast to the ego's demand for clear, fast answers. Listening is an act of surrender. In many ways, learning to listen to the unconscious is an act of surrender. It means acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, that parts of ourselves know things we have yet to comprehend consciously. It is a shift from a top-down approach to life, where the ego dictates and commands, to a more integrated dialogue, where both the conscious and unconscious voices are heard. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating the various parts of ourselves. It is through this dialogue with the unconscious that we stop living a fragmented existence driven by force and instead begin to align with a deeper, more natural unfolding of our potential. In practical terms, this means making time for reflection, journaling dreams, observing synchronicities without dismissing them, engaging with art, myths, and literature that stir something deep within. It means cultivating a practice of listening, not just with the mind, but with the soul, moving from forcing to flow. When we engage with the unconscious in this way, we gradually shift from forcing to flow. Life no longer feels like a battle to be won, but a mystery to be lived. We start to see obstacles not just as blockages, but as symbols carrying messages. Decisions are guided not merely by logic, but by a sense of inner alignment. And when synchronicities appear, we don't just shrug them off. We recognize them as signs that we are on the right path. Carl Jung's message is clear. Life is not meant to be pushed into submission. It is a dance, a dialogue, an unfolding story in which every dream, every symbol, and every coincidence is a word spoken by the deeper self. 3. The self, the inner guide beyond the ego. If we are to stop forcing life and instead allow it to flow naturally, there is one concept in Jungian psychology that we must understand deeply: the self. Not the ego, not the persona we show the world, but the self, a deeper, more expansive center of our being. For Jung, the self is not just a psychological idea. It is the organizing principle of our entire psyche, the unifying force that brings together our conscious experiences with the vast and mysterious unconscious. But what exactly is the self? And why is it so central to Jung's teaching on letting life flow? Jung described the self as the totality of the personality, encompassing everything we are, known and unknown, seen and unseen. If you imagine the psyche as a circle, the ego is just a small point near the center, the part of us that is aware of itself. The self, by contrast, is the whole circle. It holds all that we are and all that we could become. It is both who we are now and who we are meant to be. The self is not the same as the ego. In our modern world, we are trained to inflate the ego. We're told to cultivate confidence, assertiveness, and self-definition. But while the ego is necessary, it gives us identity, agency, and structure, it is not the master of our being. When the ego tries to dictate the entirety of our lives, it quickly runs into limits. It lacks the depth, wisdom, and complexity of the unconscious. Jung saw that many of our psychological troubles come from the ego trying to usurp the role of the self. The ego thinks it knows best. It tries to plan, control, and force outcomes based on limited information. But the self operates differently. It is not concerned with egoic goals like status, wealth, or power. Instead, it seeks wholeness, a state where all parts of the psyche are acknowledged, integrated, and allowed to contribute to our life's direction. To let life flow naturally, according to Jung, is to decenter the ego and let the self take its rightful place as the guiding principle. This does not mean erasing the ego or abandoning conscious life. Rather, it means placing the ego in service to the self, allowing it to act not as a dictator, but as a steward of a much greater intelligence within. The self speaks through symbols and inner experiences. So how does the self communicate with us? Primarily through symbols, dreams, archetypes, and synchronicities, as we explored earlier. But it also speaks through our deepest intuitions, creative impulses, and moments of profound inner knowing. Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was right or wrong, even when your conscious mind couldn't explain it? That is the self whispering through the layers of consciousness. The self often reveals itself during periods of crisis or transformation. When the ego's strategies fail, when our plans fall apart, when relationships end, when careers crumble, the self may emerge, calling us to reassess who we are and the roles we've played. Jung described this as the night sea journey, a symbolic descent into the depths where we must confront our shadows, fears, and unrealized potentials. It is here, in the depths, that we can encounter the self, not as an idea, but as a living presence within us. The mandala, symbol of the self. One of Jung's most famous discoveries was the significance of the mandala, a circular symbol representing wholeness in the self. Jung noticed that many of his patients, when engaged in deep psychological work, would begin to draw mandala-like images spontaneously. These circles, often intricately patterned, symbolize the psyche's natural drive toward balance and integration. Jung himself drew mandalas during his personal explorations, particularly in the Red Book, his illustrated record of his inner experiences. He found that creating these images helped him stabilize his psyche, especially when navigating turbulent, unconscious material. The mandala is a visual expression of the self's presence, a reminder that even amidst chaos, there is an underlying order seeking to emerge. Living in dialogue with the self. To align with the self is to cultivate a relationship with it, much like nurturing a deep friendship. This relationship is built through listening, reflecting, creating, and sometimes even withdrawing from the noise of the world to hear the quieter voice within. Practices like dream journaling, active imagination, a Jungian method of engaging with inner figures in a conscious dialogue, meditation, and creative expression can all serve as ways to connect with the self. Importantly, living in dialogue with the self means accepting that we do not have all the answers. It requires humility, patience, and trust in the unfolding process of life. The self often guides us in ways that the ego finds uncomfortable, pushing us to confront our shadows, to change direction unexpectedly, or to embrace uncertainty. But if we can trust this guidance, we begin to experience life not as a battle to be won, but as a journey of becoming. The self as a compass for flow. When the self is active in our lives, we begin to notice that things flow differently. Decisions feel less forced and more intuitive. Opportunities arise that align with our deeper values, not just our surface ambitions. Relationships deepen because we are engaging from a place of authenticity rather than performance. Even when challenges arise, we face them not with panic, but with a sense of alignment, that even this difficulty has something to teach us. Jung's ultimate insight is that the self is not separate from the world. The psyche and the cosmos are intertwined. To live in harmony with the self is to live in harmony with life itself. This is the foundation of flow, not forcing, not struggling, but aligning. As Jung beautifully put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This becoming is not a straight path, nor is it controlled by sheer will. It is an unfolding guided by the self, inviting us to participate with openness, courage, and curiosity. 5. Practical pathways to the unconscious. Jung's tools to stop forcing and start flowing. Now that we've explored the self and the shadow, the next question is, how can we practically engage with these deeper layers of the psyche? How do we stop forcing life on the surface and instead dive beneath the currents to understand what is truly guiding us? Carl Jung didn't leave us without tools. His approach to the unconscious was both experiential and symbolic. He believed that we could cultivate a relationship with the unconscious by working actively with its contents, not merely analyzing, but engaging. By doing so, we invite a dialogue with the parts of ourselves that have been hidden or ignored, allowing them to express, transform, and integrate. In this section, we'll explore 3 of Jung's most influential techniques: active imagination, dream work, and creative expression. Each of these methods provides a pathway to converse with the unconscious and, in turn, ease our compulsion to control life through sheer force. Active imagination, dialoguing with the unconscious. Perhaps one of Jung's most original contributions was a method he called active imagination. It's a technique designed to consciously interact with the images, figures, and symbols that arise from the unconscious, whether through dreams, fantasies, or sudden inspirations. Active imagination begins with an image, a feeling, or a fragment from a dream. Instead of dismissing it as random or insignificant, we allow it to come alive in our mind's eye. We visualize it, pay attention to its form, and then, this is crucial, we engage in a dialogue with it. For example, suppose you dreamt of a wise old man standing at a crossroads. Instead of brushing the dream aside, active imagination invites you to imagine yourself back at that scene, asking the old man questions. Who are you? Why are you here? What guidance do you have for me? You let the figure respond, not by making up answers intellectually, but by allowing the unconscious to speak through the imagination. This might feel strange at first, especially in a culture that privileges rational thought over imagination. But Jung insists that the psyche is alive and autonomous. The figures we meet in dreams and fantasies are not just creations of the mind. They are personifications of deeper psychic realities. By conversing with them, we tap into layers of insight that our ego alone cannot access. Active imagination is not just about insight, it is also about transformation. Jung believed that by bringing unconscious material into dialogue with the conscious mind, we facilitate the individuation process, the journey towards psychological wholeness. Dream work, understanding the language of the night. Dreams are another primary gateway to the unconscious. Jung famously said, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul." To stop forcing life and start flowing, we must become attentive to this nightly conversation with ourselves. Dream work begins with recording your dreams. Keep a notebook by your bed and jot down whatever fragments you remember as soon as you wake. Over time, patterns, symbols, and recurring themes will begin to emerge. But writing them down is only the first step. The next is interpreting these symbols, not with a one-size-fits-all dictionary, but through personal reflection and symbolic exploration. Jung cautioned that while some archetypal symbols are universal, their meanings are often deeply personal. For instance, dreaming of a river might represent the flow of life for one person, but it could signify danger or transition for another, depending on their life context and emotional state. Asking reflective questions like, what feelings did this dream evoke? Where in my life am I encountering a similar situation or emotion? What might this symbol be asking me to recognize or change? By engaging with these questions, we allow the unconscious to guide us, not by dictating, but by inviting us to interpret and integrate its messages. Jung also emphasized that dream work is not meant to solve problems instantly. Dreams often speak in riddles, layers, and metaphors. The goal is not immediate clarity, but a deepening relationship with the self, where meanings unfold gradually and naturally, much like watching a seed grow into a tree. Creative expression, giving form to the invisible. Another powerful method to access the unconscious is through creative expression. Jung himself painted, drew mandalas, carved, and even built a stone tower in Ballingen to give form to his inner world. He believed that creativity was not just an artistic endeavor, but a spiritual and psychological necessity. By creating, whether through painting, music, writing, dance, or sculpture, we allow the unconscious to speak in its native language of symbol and form. Often, things we cannot articulate in words find their way into colors, shapes, movements, or melodies. For those who struggle to meditate or sit with their thoughts, creative expression offers a different kind of mindfulness. When you paint a spontaneous image, write a stream of consciousness journal, or even doodle without purpose, you are allowing unconscious material to surface in a safe and meaningful way. Creative acts don't have to be shared or polished. Their value lies in the process, not the product. As you create, pay attention to what arises, what images keep recurring, what feelings emerge as you express. These are clues, breadcrumbs from the unconscious leading you toward greater self-awareness and wholeness. The value of slowness and reflection. All these methods share one underlying principle: slowness and reflection. Engaging with the unconscious is not a quick fix. It is a practice of patience, of surrendering the ego's urgency to control and allowing insights to emerge in their own time. This reflective pace is a counterbalance to the hurriedness with which we often approach life. Instead of rushing to change things, we learn to sit with them, observe, and understand. And in doing so, we move from a reactive stance, where we force solutions, to a receptive stance, where we allow the psyche's natural intelligence to guide us forward. From practice to flow. When we regularly engage in active imagination, dream work, and creative expression, we start to notice subtle shifts in our daily lives. We become more attuned to synchronicities, more aware of patterns in our behavior, and more accepting of life's unfolding, however uncertain it may seem. By cultivating this connection with the unconscious, we gradually shift from forcing life into a rigid mold to participating in its natural rhythm. We become co-creators with the self, dancing with the mystery rather than wrestling it into submission. 7. The power of surrender. Letting go is the gateway to transformation. In a world that glorifies control, ambition, and relentless striving, the word surrender often carries a negative connotation. We tend to associate it with defeat, weakness, or resignation, something we must avoid at all costs if we want to succeed. But Carl Jung saw surrender differently. For Jung, surrender was not a passive giving up. It was an active engagement with life's deeper currents, an alignment with the self that opens the door to genuine transformation. So what does it really mean to surrender in the Jungian sense? And how does surrender help us stop forcing life into narrow channels and instead flow with its natural rhythm? Jung's vision of surrender was not about abandoning effort or becoming indifferent to life's challenges. Instead, it was about yielding the ego's need to dominate, allowing the wisdom of the unconscious and the greater self to guide the process of growth. As Jung wrote, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. Acceptance, then, is the first act of surrender. By accepting what is, both within ourselves and in our external circumstances, we stop wasting energy on resistance and denial. This frees us to engage more creatively with reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. Surrender as psychological maturity. To surrender is a mark of psychological maturity. The immature ego clings to the illusion that it can control everything: outcomes, people, the future. But life invariably teaches us that control is limited. Unexpected events, losses, changes. We encounter these not because we are weak, but because we are human. Jung emphasized that maturity involves recognizing that the ego is not the master of the psyche. There is a deeper intelligence, the self, that knows what we need, even when our conscious mind does not. Surrender, then, is the ego stepping aside, not in defeat, but in reverence for the larger mystery of life. This shift is crucial for personal growth. When we surrender, we stop imposing rigid expectations on ourselves and others. We become more flexible, open to new perspectives, and capable of navigating life's uncertainties with resilience rather than rigidity. The alchemy of surrender. Jung often used the metaphor of alchemy to describe psychological transformation. Alchemy, the ancient art of transforming base metals into gold, was for Jung a symbolic representation of the inner process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. One of the key stages in alchemy is solutio, the dissolving of structures that are no longer serving us. This dissolution is akin to surrender, the melting away of fixed beliefs, identities, and defenses so that something new can emerge. Without solutio, there can be no rebirth, no transformation. Similarly, in our psychological life, surrender allows the dissolution of the false self, the persona we've constructed to meet societal expectations, to mask our vulnerabilities, or to cling to outdated roles. By letting this false self dissolve, we create space for the true self to emerge, bringing with it renewed purpose, vitality, and creativity. Trusting the process. One of Jung's core insights is that the psyche has its own self-regulating mechanisms. Just as the body knows how to heal a wound, the psyche knows how to restore balance, if we let it. But this process requires trust. Surrender involves trusting that there is an underlying intelligence in life that guides our growth, even through pain, uncertainty, or failure. It's the trust that even when the path is unclear, something within us knows the way forward. This trust does not eliminate fear or discomfort. In fact, surrender often brings us face to face with our deepest fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of not being good enough. But instead of trying to banish these fears through force or denial, Jung encourages us to befriend them, to listen to what they reveal about our unconscious needs and wounds. In this way, surrender is not passivity. It is active participation in the unfolding of our psyche. It is an inner posture of humility, patience, and openness, where we say to life, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn. Show me. Surrender and creativity. Interestingly, surrender is also deeply tied to creativity. Creative breakthroughs often happen not when we are straining for solutions, but when we let go, step back, and allow ideas to surface from the unconscious. This is why so many creative people speak of inspiration arriving unexpectedly, during a walk, in a dream, or while resting. Jung himself experienced this during the period of his life when he engaged with the Red Book, surrendering to the images, fantasies, and inner figures that arose from his depths. He didn't try to rationalize or control them. He let them speak, and in doing so, he uncovered insights that would shape modern psychology. When we surrender, we enter a state of receptivity, where new connections, perspectives, and possibilities can emerge. This is the wellspring of creativity, not just in art, but in how we live, love, and make meaning of our experiences. Surrender as a daily practice. Surrender is not a one-time event, it is a daily practice. It might look like pausing before reacting, reflecting before making decisions, or creating space for stillness amidst the busyness of life. It can be as simple as asking, what am I trying to control right now? What would it feel like to let go? Just a little. Where can I trust life more, even if I don't understand it? Practices like meditation, mindfulness, journaling, and contemplative prayer can support this daily surrender. These practices help us tune into the present moment, where the self is always quietly at work, guiding us beyond the noise of the ego. The paradox of surrender. Here's the beautiful paradox Jung invites us to embrace. When we surrender, we gain strength. When we stop forcing, we move with the currents of life, not against them. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or painless, but it does become more authentic, more aligned, and more meaningful. As Jung wrote, only what is truly oneself has the power to heal. To surrender is to return to ourselves, not the self constructed by fear or ambition, but the self that knows who we are meant to become.